get it done in a timely fashion. And I'm sure that we worked very diligently to make this happen, so we'll get it done. Ms. Sanders, will you please announce the meeting?
Yes, this meeting has been announced in accordance with the open meetings resolution and is a legally constituted meeting of
get it done in a timely fashion, and thank you, I'm sure that we worked very diligently to make this happen, so we'll get it done. Ms. Sanders, will you please announce the meeting?
Yes, this meeting has been announced in accordance with the open meetings resolution and is a legally constituted meeting of
get it done in a timely fashion, and thank you, I'm sure that we worked very diligently to make this happen, so we'll get it done. Ms. Sanders, will you please announce the meeting?
Yes, this meeting has been announced in accordance with the open meetings resolution and is a legally constituted meeting of
get it done in a timely fashion, and thank you, I'm sure that we worked.
I would like to remove number 1110, also 1111, and 13.
So I copied item number 13, Ms. Sanders. Which were the other two?
1110.
11.
Advanced Communications on Site Radios, PSFA 2019-20 Security Awards for Los Lunas High School, Valencia High School, Valencia Middle School, Am Parish, Century High School, Bosque Farm, Sundance, and LLE handheld radios for high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools.
Okay, found it.
Okay,
and what? Go ahead.
1111, which is Raptor Technologies for annual renewal of emergency management software systems operational, and 25153 Medicaid. That needs to actually be changed, Mr. President, to from the operational fund to 31703, which is 2 mil state match and Medicaid. And then if I may, for those that can't see anything but the agenda, 13 is the approval of the district organizational chart 2020-21 tabled 12120 and 21120.
Excuse me, Brian, Mr. Smith, could you have your IT person? Did you have your IT person come in here? Or no one's in it, right? I'm getting ready to lose connection here. Continue. Go ahead. I'm just going to lose power here.
So, Mrs. Sanders, just to clarify, you wish to remove item 13, item 11B10, and item 11B11.
Correct. And then just change the, I'm sorry, back up. I do not want to remove 1111. Gotcha. I just want to change the operational code to this 2 mil state match 31703. So I'm not asking to remove 1111, just I'm asking to remove 1110.
It might be the bottom.
Okay, so I have 11B10 and item number 13 removed off the agenda. Any more changes?
No, Mr.
With that, I'd stand for a motion on the agenda as Ms. Sanders has presented it.
I make the motion, you approve the agenda with the changes Ms. Sanders just brought up.
I have a motion by Mr. Stephen Otero to approve the agenda with the changes Ms. Sanders brought up. I will stand for a second.
I will second that.
I have a second by Mr. David Vickers to approve the agenda as Ms. Sanders has presented with the removal of those two items. Mr. Frank Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Vickers, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Hiron, how do you vote?
Mr. Smith, I apologize. We used this iPad for the last meeting, so they drained the battery, and we're having trouble, so I'm losing you now. Okay. Okay, could you repeat the motion, please?
Sure, I have a motion by Mr. Stephen Otero to accept the agenda with the two changes Ms. Sanders has presented. I have a second by Mr. Vickers to accept the agenda with the two changes presented by Mrs. Sanders. I have Mr. Frank Otero that voted yes, Mr. Vickers voted yes, Mr. Stephen Otero voted yes. Mr. Hidon, how do you vote?
Yes.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Yes, and I vote yes. Brings us to item number 5, consent items. I'll stand for a motion regarding the consent items.
I'll make a motion that we approve the consent items as presented.
I have a motion by Mr. Stephen Otero to approve the consent items. I'll stand for a second.
No, sir.
Sorry.
You have some discussion items.
We have some discussion, I think.
Yes, sir. You can't just do a consent. You have to do with the exceptions of the ones that are discussed. Yes,
I don't know which items those are.
it's on your email.
The email I got
Just now.
was not marked.
11E,
The one that was sent a while back.
The one you guys sent it before the board meeting, after you guys did it. I sent you a new one right before the meeting started.
Okay.
And it has where you all signed and did it via phone, and it gives you all of them. You have some discussion items.
Okay. Want me to make a motion?
One second, Vickers.
So Mr.
Mr. President, Mr. President,
Frank Otero.
Mr. President, Mr. Vickers, I think that Mr. Steve Otero needs to amend his motion to include the items that are being excluded from being consented.
Okay.
So that would be items number 7, 8, 9, 10.
And was your name? Yeah, carry for your card.
Mr. President,
And
Mr.
two items were removed.
President,
Yes. Mr.
I
Stephen
withdraw
Otero,
my motion.
you withdraw your motion. Stand for a motion on the consent items.
Mr. President,
Mr. Frank Otero.
I move that we consent the entire consent sheet as presented tonight with the exceptions of the following items. Item number 7, approval to suspend policy 2.9, policies of the Board of Education. Item number 8, approval of policy 10.5, infectious disease policy. Item number 9, the approval to reinstate policy number 2.9, policies of the Board of Education. Item number 10, the approval of the tabled item, March 16, 2020, special meeting, approval of retention of and contract for financial investigator by legal counsel. The next item would be item number 11E. That's the approval of resolution 20-003- Shonda Slow Going Creations. And that's those are the exceptions, Mr. President, members of the board.
There's also, Mr. President, number 13 also.
Those items have been removed from the agenda.
Okay, that's right.
Those are, yeah, yeah.
So I have a motion by Mr. Frank Otero to approve the consent items with the exception of item number 7, approval to suspend policy 2.9. Item number 8, approval of policy 10.5, infectious disease policy. Item number 9, approval to reinstate the policy. Item number 10, approval of tabled item, approval to for retention of and contract for financial investigator by legal counsel. And item number 11E, approval of resolution 20-003, Shonda Andrews Slow Going Creations. I'll stand for a second.
I'll second
that.
I have a second by Mr. David Vickers. Mr. Frank Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Vickers, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Hidon, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I vote yes. For the benefit of the audience, all agenda items have been reviewed by the board members individually. Consent items are the action items on the agenda presented by the superintendent and her staff for approval. If no discussion has been asked regarding these items by any of the board members, the items may be submitted for approval with one motion and one vote. That brings us to item number 7, and let me look at the consent sheet. Mr. Frank Otero or Mr. David Vickers?
Okay,
Mr. Frank Otero.
Mr. President,
Mr. Otero.
well, I guess I can go ahead and move, I move to suspend policy number 2.9, the policies of the Board of Education.
I have a motion by Mr. Frank Otero to suspend policy 2.9, policies of the Board of Education. I'll stand for a second.
I'll second it.
I have a second by Mr. Eloy Hidon. Mr. Frank Otero, how do you vote?
Let's
Yeah.
have discussion, please.
Oh,
We need to,
Absolutely. Mr. Vickers?
Okay, so I would like to know why it is necessary to do this.
So if policy 2.9 allows us to suspend the 3 readings of a policy, normally we have 3 readings of a policy in succession for 3 different board meetings. This allows us to waive the reading of those 3 for a policy that we think needs to be put in place immediately. And then we go over that policy, we vote on that policy, and then at the end of it, we reinstate policy 2.9 that now requires us, once again, to have 3 readings for a policy that we want to include. If that makes sense.
I think it makes sense. Why is there the urgency on the policy that we're going to discuss?
Well, so I think.
What is there in that is not, that can't be done in the meantime?
I
Why does
think,
it have to go through?
thank you, Mr. Vickers, for your comments. I think that the subject matter of the policy, which is the infectious disease policy, is one of the reasons that we would waive the 3 readings, as that could take over 3 months if we have 1 meeting a month while we're not in school session. So that's why the waiving of the 3 policies was on here, just based on the subject matter of the policy. That doesn't mean we're approving any policy, doesn't mean anything. It just means we're waiving it in case we get to that point and we want to call it.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
Mr.
yes.
President?
I almost left.
Mr. President, I have a follow-up question on Mr. Vickers.
Mr. Steve Otero.
Who brought this before us? Who's the one that asked this be brought on the agenda?
For the policy,
Yes, sir.
this policy was
suspension of the
submitted
policy.
by one of the school attorneys.
I think I'm with Mr. Vickers on this. Like, what's the urgency on this? I mean, I'd like to get some more information on it.
On the
Okay,
policy.
so I understand we have an urgent situation in the community.
Yes.
What in this policy that we're going to look at can we not do now that we absolutely have to have this policy in place? And I'd like to give Ms. Sanders' opinion on that. Are her hands tied because this policy is not here and that we need to approve it?
Mr. President, if I may?
Ms. Sanders.
Mr. President, members of the board, and Mr. Vickers, I think that the question before you on number 7 is whether or not you want to suspend the policy. And once you do that, then you could move on and we can talk about the infectious disease policy. So right now, the motion on the floor is that you would suspend 2.9 in the event that there was an approval of the policy that's behind that. Nothing more, nothing less.
Okay, so basically this is a procedural thing. So I can go ahead with approving this, but if we decide to approve the policy that we're talking about, I would want it to be restricted to a certain time period so we can go back and do the proper 3 readings at some point in time after 60 days perhaps or something, rather than have it as policy permanently without having gone through the 3 readings. It's 6 pages long and there are a lot of issues in it.
Right, so right now we have a motion on the table for item number 7 to suspend policy 2.9. I have a motion by Mr. Frank Otero. Do I have a second? If there's any more discussion.
I did second that, Mr. Smith.
I have a second by Mr. Hidon. Mr. Frank Otero, how do you vote on item number 7?
Yes.
Mr. Vickers, how do you vote on item number 7?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Otero, how do you vote on item number 7?
Yes.
Mr. Hidon, how do you vote on item number 7?
Yes.
Yes, and I vote yes. So item number 7 states policy 2.9 is suspended, no longer requires 3 readings to adopt a policy for the Board of Education. I will move on to item number 8. I would stand for, actually, there's some discussion on this one too. Mr. Vickers?
Well, I should have a motion to put it on the table and then the discussion after that. Is that correct?
I'm sorry?
Shouldn't we have the motion and second to place it on the table and then have the discussion after that?
Well, I usually,
Mr.
if
President?
somebody has asked for the item to be discussed, I let them do
Mr.
the
President?
discussion first.
Mr. President, could you have Superintendent Sanders read the policy statement, and then we'll understand if we need to make a motion to approve or make a motion to deny this?
The policy statement or the entire policy?
The
Mr.
whole policy, I guess. Or, I know it's long.
Mr. President,
To be addressed.
Mr. President,
Mr. Frank Otero.
Mr. President, Mr. Hidon, and Mr. Vickers, I think right now what we should do is allow Superintendent Sanders to go ahead and explain why she's brought this to us. And I would assume, and I've been, on the board a long time, that, and from my past experiences with the Department of Health, we never had a pandemic there. Last time that we had something that they thought was going to be serious was Y2K, and that turned out to be nothing. And so let's go ahead and turn it over to Superintendent Sanders and explain why she brought it and which attorney she talked to and why we should address this on this particular day and time, because we have a real emergency in our hand, in our community, in our world, in our country, you name it. So that's where I have, that's my statement.
So this policy was put on here based on what we're dealing with COVID-19, and I agree with Mr. Frank Otero. We are in a very, very serious situation. This might have been something that we could have planned for earlier, maybe a policy similar to this, but this policy, I believe, was sent out in advance, to be read in advance. And if we want Ms. Sanders to read the policy to you or to define why this policy is on the agenda, we can certainly have her do that. So Ms. Sanders.
Mr. President, members of the board, I actually support the policy, so I probably can't speak to why it's on the agenda other than it was the advice of Andy Sanchez. And I've spoken to everyone across the state, 89 school districts, 112 charter schools. Most of them find this to be very confusing because it is directly in conflict with what the governor's directives have been and what the legal counsel from the Public Education Department have to say regarding this. I think it's very laborious in terms of the things that we would have to keep records of, such as immunization records, requiring immunizations for the flu, and keeping those immunization records on file in our personnel office, placing individuals on family medical leave. It's, like you said, 7 pages long, and I think it's, in my opinion, wrought with concerns on my part in terms of how this would be carried out. And if I were going to spend my entire time dealing with the flu and those sorts of things that go with what's in this policy, not to mention COVID-19, which is really actually mentioned at the very end of the policy, I just see some huge issues with it. That's my.
So if I may, I've read through the policy, and I believe that there's some things in there of interest that we need to consider probably in our district. I also believe there's some things that are a little bit confusing to me and maybe not as clear as I would like them spelled out. And I know due to the situation that we're in, we don't have a whole lot of time to approve something like this. I, for one, would, in my opinion, take an extra day or two to go through it and maybe get some questions answered on my part to determine whether this is something that I wanted to support or not. But like I said, there's some good things in there, and there's some things that I would like a little bit more clarification on. So that would be my 2 cents, because I have read the whole thing, and I encourage you to read it and put it in a situational context and see if it's something that we may or may not need. But I'd also ask you to compare it to what we already have in place to see if it's going to, if we're not just reinventing the wheel as to something that we've already had. Just my opinion.
Mr. President,
Mr. Hidon.
this question is going to be for Board Member Frank Otero. With the policy we have in place and what's going on right now, real world, and this policy that our attorney is asking for us, he's giving us direction to take action on, what is the big differences and what is the latitude that we have to work with this? I mean, is it a positive, negative?
Well, Mr. President and Mr. Hidon, members of the board, what I would look at it is you know, I'm not looking at the existing policy, but you know, there's nobody that's going to tell me they were expecting a pandemic to happen, and you know, you can't expect that language in the policy. However, I'm with several of your board members and the superintendent that there's a lot of language here. It's pretty wordy, and it is something that we really need to look at over the long run, and I would say over the short haul right now, we need to adjust with our policies with what's going on in the real world. So there's good parts, and it starts out good, and then it gets kind of ugly as the deeper it goes.
Mr. President,
Mr. Stephen Otero.
so it seems like there's an urgency in some way, form, or another, but I believe our school district is just like all school districts in the state are taking direction from PED and the governor. So based on their direction, why do we want to try to change things? If it's working for every school district and it's led by the governor and PED, I don't see any sense in even addressing it right now. You yourself said that there's a lot of things that aren't clear to you. So at this point in time, it looks like all of us are confused about it. But I personally feel that if we're taking the direction of PED and the governor's office, then we're doing the right thing as it stands right now.
Thank you, Mr. Stephen Otero. There is some, the reason this came about, I'm assuming, is there is some discussion as to whether who has the authority to do what it is they have to do. And I'm not 100% clear on that. So that's why I would like a little bit more clarification on this. But is there more discussion on item number 8?
Mr. President,
Frank Otero?
I would say that I know we're getting direction from the governor and what have you, but I don't think that we've got anything like a boilerplate saying, well, here, all you districts use this boilerplate policy. The policies, every district has their own policies. Of course, they all have to correlate. I mean, they all have to kind of be compatible with each other, but, you know, each district hires different attorneys and what have you, and they put up language in different ways. And so I still think that, well, we still need further direction from Santa Fe and what have you. And as Mr. Steve Otero just kind of stated that, you know, this kind of disaster, if you want to call it that, is still going on right now. We don't even know what percentage we're at right now. In my opinion, we haven't even rose up the graph yet. So, you know, I haven't seen anything in Valencia County yet, and it kind of scares me because we don't have anybody, any kind of, all the lines to get sampled are up in Albuquerque and stuff. So, you know, I just hope that it's just, you know, a good omen that, you know, Valencia County is doing well right now.
And I agree with you, Mr. Frank Otero, that the impact of this is yet to be determined, because I truly believe we're in the infancy of this thing, and it's going to be around for a while. So if we're going to think about including policies as far as similar to this one here, I don't necessarily think that it's something that has to be done immediately, but I think it's something that has to be understood, and we have to take a look at everything that we have in place and make sure that we're covering our employees and our school district in every possible way. But as for me, I certainly would like a little bit more time to.
Mr. President, how much more time do you think that we need as a board to digest more of this?
That's going to be independent of each one of us and our interpretation of some of the things that are said in the policy.
Mr. President,
Mr. Stephen Otero.
first, I don't know, Mr. Hiron, are you done?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. Who sought, if anybody, the opinion of the attorney on this policy? Was it sought after by Ms. Sanders, or who? How did this come about?
So no, Ms. Sanders did not solicit the information from the attorney. The attorney, from what I understand, and Ms. Sanders, you can correct me if I'm wrong, thought we needed this policy included in our policies because of some of the permissions and rights that PED and the state have over the Los Lunas School District, or a school district in general. I believe that's how this policy came to be.
Mr. President, I totally agree with you because of the date that we got this and when he was working on this. And we've also seen the direction that the United States Surgeon General and the New Mexico governor have taken now. So this was a few days ago or a week ago or something like that.
Correct. Ms. Sanders?
Mr. President, members of the board, if I may, I believe that this is actually something that was sent out mass to superintendents and maybe board members as well from the attorney. And I believe that, you know, he put out an opinion, he put out a policy, and to many more people than just us. And it was, in my view, and again, this is something that, and I've told him myself, I said, you know, it's very confusing when we get direction from the PED and we get direction from the governor to do certain things. The original discussion that we had was about the anti-donation clause. didn't have anything to do with infectious diseases. I understand that this is about an infectious disease, but I think this could be so much more broad than what it is, and it could answer some of the anti-donation things. It really doesn't. It goes into, there's a couple of things in there about putting everybody on admin leave, which would be an absolute nightmare for us to try to get everybody in to give admin leave or mail out things. It's just laborious. And so my point is that all 89 districts and all 112 charter schools are in the same shape. And we're taking our direction from the governor and from the public education department. They may be wrong. They may be completely and totally wrong, and this attorney is correct, but that's who we take direction from, not our attorney, if we're not asking for the advice, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Ms. Sanders. And
Go ahead, somebody else.
I appreciate the comments, and reading this, I do know that it covers some situations that only a situation like we're in right now would present. So that's why I'm saying there might be some things in here that would be beneficial, but there might be some things in here that would not. So,
President, if I may?
Yes, Ms. Sanders.
President, members of the board, just a reminder, we are still working on the policies that we've hired John Kennedy to complete. This particular policy would either end up in 10 or it would end up in 7, where we haven't hit yet. We've completed the section 6 up to this point, and then we kind of got off the rail for adopting policies, but this policy wouldn't have come up until later, and it can absolutely be addressed through John Kennedy and his work with our policy.
Mr. President,
Mr. Hidon.
No, it's Frank, Mr. Frank Otero.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Franco.
that's all right.
I see he had a little yellow box around him, so I figured that was.
Well, I would suggest that yeah, we look at it, but not, I don't know how long that's going to be, because like I say, the uncertainties right now, we don't know how long that's going to be as far as getting back on with the policies. I think we need to do this in a timely manner, at least within a month. And we could talk to John Kennedy about it also, but I think that it's something we shouldn't put off for 6 months, for instance, but, we need to do something in the meantime. And, it's tough to have discussion right now. This is our opportunity to discuss what our concerns are. And so, we're kind of hearing it from all of us.
Mr. President? Mr. President?
Hidon?
Yes. Members of the board, Frank, I totally agree with you on that. And I'm going to reiterate that when this came out, it was a week ago, I don't know what, a few days ago, and the game has changed. Governor's told us things to do, mandated us, and the Surgeon General. So, and I agree with you, we need to address this, and hopefully within 30 days we can get something completed. And maybe in that time we can tweak it some more, and because what we're facing right now, this game's going to keep changing, and maybe we can tweak this policy that's in our best interest in the next 30 days. So, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion to table this, and I would say within 30 days, or we'll skip one board meeting, we'll revisit this.
Mr. President,
That's a form of a motion.
may I ask something in between this?
Ms. Sanders?
Is this the policy that you want to look at, or do you want to have Mr. Kennedy? What do we want to do?
So
We
I
have this
would like
policy,
to,
Mr. President, my motion is going to be that we have this policy right now that has been drafted, and this is the one we're addressing. I'm making a motion to table this one. Okay, let's make sure we're proper and procedural. So let's get there's a second, then we can have discussion on this.
Second.
I'll second it.
so I have a second by Mr. Frank Otero. So I have a motion by Mr. Eloy Hidon to table item number 8, approval of the policy 10.5, and I have a second by Mr. Frank Otero. Any more discussion?
Mr.
Mr.
President?
President,
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Stephen Otero.
I guess this opinion came from Attorney Andrew Sanchez. And being as the Kennedy firm is revamping our current policies, I think it might be wise, not really as a second opinion, and maybe it is, to, before it comes before us again, that we get an opinion on this opinion, just to fact check it from the Kennedy law firm that is currently working on our policies.
Thank you, Mr. Stephen Otero. I wouldn't mind that, but there are portions of this policy that I agree with 100%, and I can see in the future where we're gonna need this. So I don't wanna disregard this policy and have a different law firm come in and say, okay, write as a policy based on what you feel is gonna be necessary for us based on this pandemic in the future to deal with our personnel and pay and leave and everything else. There's some good things in here, there's some confusing things in here, and I think this document should be part of that discussion no matter who it's with. Any more discussion? So I have a motion to table item number 8 by Mr. Eloy Hidon. I have a second by Mr. Frank Otero. Mr. Frank Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Vickers, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Otero, how do you vote?
No.
Mr. Hidon, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Item number 8 will be tabled by a vote of 4-1. That brings us to item number 9, approval to reinstate policy 2.9. This one should go fast. I'll stand for a motion.
Mr.
I
President,
move
go ahead, Mr. Hill.
I move that we approve, item number 9, approval to reinstate policy 2.9.
I have a motion by Mr. Eloy Hidon to reinstate policy 2.9. I'll stand for a second.
I'll second that. That was me.
I hope I don't restart here real quick. I have a second by Mr. Vickers. Mr. Frank Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Vickers, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Hidon, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Policy 2.9 is reinstated. That brings us to item number 10 on the agenda. And I'd have to pull back up the consent sheet. Mr. Stephen Otero?
I'd like to make a motion that we table this to further research. I read the proposal and I felt that in the interest of finances, I think we might need to look at other options rather than just going with this one. So I would prefer to table this one at this point in time.
Thank you, Mr.
I don't know
Stephen
if that-
Otero. I have a motion.
Bring that as a motion.
I'm sorry, were you done? Sorry, were you done?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, were you done? I cut you
No.
off. You good?
I'm
So I have a
good.
motion by Mr. Stephen Otero to table item number 10 for further discussion. I'll stand for a second.
I'll
Second.
second.
I'll give this one Mr. Frank Otero. I have a second by Mr. Frank Otero. Any more discussion? Mr. Frank Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Vickers, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Item number 10 is tabled. Brings us to item number 11B11. Is that correct? Raptor Technologies for annual renewal of emergency management software system 31703, 2-meal state match. I can't read my notes. Ms. Sanders?
Mr. President, I don't believe that that one was up for discussion, not according to the consent sheet.
The next one
Changed
above.
it.
The one above it was what I asked to be removed.
Item number 1110 to be removed. Is that correct? Is that correct, Ms. Sanders? You wanted item number 1110 removed, correct?
Yes. 1110, not 1111. 1111 was actually approved on the consent sheet. The next discussion item is,
Item number 11E.
correct, sir.
That brings us to item number 11E, approval of resolution 20-003, Shonda Andrews Slow Goin' Creations.
Mr. President,
Mr. Frank Otero.
okay, I believe I listed that for discussion. Going along with what we usually do is resolutions are usually involved an employee or a family member of an employee. And rather than consenting it and it does deserve to be discussed in an open setting. So Superintendent Sanders, could you please provide a quick explanation of this resolution?
Yes, Mr. President, members of the board, Mr. Frank Otero, this resolution is actually for Shonda Andrews, who is a relative to a teacher named Carrie Dutton at Los Lunas Middle School. And this business is, I believe, a screen printing business for apparel.
Any more
All right,
discussion on item 11? I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry,
Mr.
that's all the questions I have.
Any more discussions on item 11E? With no more discussion, I'd stand for a motion.
Mr. President,
Mr. Frank Otero.
I move that we approve the resolution number 20-003, Shonda Andrews / Slow Going Creations.
The motion by Mr. Frank Otero to approve resolution 20-003. I'll stand for a second.
Second.
I have a second by Mr. Stephen Otero. Mr. Frank Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Vickers, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Eloy Hidon, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I vote yes. That brings us to item number 14, correct?
Yes.
New business. Board members, are there any requests for topics for upcoming work sessions and/or board meetings?
Mr. President,
Mr. Hidon.
I have a couple. One of them, I would like to set up a work session as soon as possible regarding goal settings for our superintendent. So I don't know if we want to come up with a date now, or Ms. Sanders wants to look at her calendar and get with as soon as we can. I don't know how we want to address that.
So I think that I could probably, if it's okay with you, work with Ms. Sanders and come up with a date that's in the very near future.
Okay. The second one was the question that you had, Mr. Smith, I think it was the last meeting. When will we have follow-up regarding the Los Lunas Facebook parents page? I want to know where we're at with it. There was some things said back and forth at that last meeting, but I haven't heard any follow-up on it. And I would like to know when we would hear something on that,
Mr.
and
President.
how we're going to go forward with that.
Ms. Sanders?
Mr. President, members of the board, Mr. Eloy Hiron, this is something that's in litigation. I think that would be more appropriate in a closed executive session.
Okay. So I would like to see this on the agenda at our next meeting under closed executive session.
Thank you, Mr. Hidon. I will work with Ms. Sanders to get a closed executive session on the next board meeting.
Absolutely.
Any further requests for topics?
Mr. President,
Mr. Vickers?
regarding the current problem we have in our community, I would be interested to know what procedures we have in place should a staff member or student become ill with pandemic disease of some kind. And, if, you know, have we addressed that? And what kind of procedures do we intend to take if that should happen? But I'd like to see how that's spelled out.
Ms. Sanders?
Mr. President, members of the board, I would be happy to have that again, as we did in our special meeting, or I can provide Mr. Vickers the PowerPoint that I used in that presentation.
Okay.
Whatever is your pleasure.
And any more input for?
Mr. President, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to frame this, because when I come across, I don't want to be giving direction. There's more questions. So if it comes out that I'm giving direction, that's not at all what I'm
Okay, Mr. Hito,
bring up.
Mr. Hito, can I give my suggestion and then we'll continue?
Go ahead.
Okay. So I have one, I don't know if it's a work session or an information session. I know that I've brought it up twice and Ms. Sanders has talked to me about it twice. I would like to see frequent updates on our status as a school district as far as who we have on site at any given time. There's a lot of confusion as to what the state's definition is, PED's definition is, the news media's definition is, and other school districts' definition is of essential personnel and essential tasks. So we'll have to have a work session or an information session or emails regularly. I just want to get clarification in writing as to who and when our employees are to be physically present. And like I said, as to the definitions of what that means. I want to ensure that we're following our state requirements. Most definitely I want to do that, but more importantly, I want to work towards reducing our footprint at the district by having as many of the employees as possible work remotely. And I understand we have many things that need to get done, but I believe if we consider options, we can be safe and productive, and we may need to do something like this on a rotating schedule or something, so we don't have the same people doing the same tasks all at once. But just a clarification on the 5-person rule. I mean, I've heard it's a building, I've heard it's a room. People are concerned that they're using the same restrooms. I mean, it's really, really confusing. And as Mr. Franco-Otero said earlier, we're in a situation that we've never been in before. So if we can get the information, we can better understand what our roles and responsibilities are. And I know that, and I don't want to speak for the entire board, but I know that one of the goals that we probably all have is to keep everybody in this district as safe as humanly possible. And if that means finding a way for them not to be in a large group or to be physically present, but yet be productive, I don't want to understate that at all. Be productive to the district and actually perform duties, then do training or something. I mean, it's something that I'm interested in, but I guess what I'm really searching for is those hardcore definitions of what that entails and what we're required to do. From PED in writing saying, look, this is what we mean by essential personnel. This is essential personnel. This is not essential personnel. But that doesn't mean that you can't use these people to do some of these essential tasks. If that makes any sense to you whatsoever. And I appreciate the communications that we've had on both times today. And I just, for my sanity, if we can just get hardcore definitions, so my mind will settle down just a little bit in this time of uncertainty, because this is uncharted for all of us. And I think that it's very important that we make sure that we have some sort of a plan.
Mr. Smith? Mr. President?
Mr. Hidon.
Members of the board, and I'm going to get on your coattails there a little bit.
Not wearing a coat.
I'm not asking to wait for a work session. What the Surgeon General, what the President, what the Governor of New Mexico has asked us to do is stay home. Today, when I drove up to these offices, I seen the parking lot full, and that was extremely disappointing seeing that. I seen the list yesterday issued by the governor and the essential functions, essential personnel, whatever you want to call that. And nowhere did I see anybody in the schools. I understand we need things, some of the things that continue to work, payroll, that I can see them coming in and processing payroll. I don't understand what all these employees are doing here. I want them to be safe. We're the biggest employer in this county, and as many paths as we cross, I don't want to be selfish and making our employees go home and crossing paths with other people. Jerome Adams yesterday said it. He said, some of us are not taking this seriously. What we're trying to do, the spirit is to make that curve right here, not a spike of people getting infected. I called the PED today, didn't get a hold of them. I talked to them a couple days ago. They said, this is an internal management issue left to the local schools. I'm extremely disappointed seeing what I've seen today because of what is being asked from us. It was asked from the governor. I don't know what's the benefit of the risk and reward of this. I don't get it. I want our employees to be safe. I want the community to be safe. I want our children to be safe. I don't think we need to wait for a work session. Remember, all of us are in this together. I'm not telling you what to do, Ms. Sanders, or the rest of the board, but we're in this together. There's been a plan. If we don't we're not mavericks and go a different way, maybe this thing will work. We're all working together. If you want a work session, Mr. Smith, I'm good with that, but there's some stuff that needs to be addressed immediately. I don't understand what the goal and intent is for all these people to be here. I don't get it. I talked to somebody this morning from the Las Cruces School District. Their school district is completely closed except for cafeteria workers. And they fed 10,000 students yesterday with 16 or 19, it wasn't 20, 16 or 19 volunteers to assist with the lunches. That's a bunch of people that they just fed. I don't have the answers, but I know what's being mandated to us and what the direction is being given to us, and we're not following that right now. I'm just throwing my hands in the air right now. I know I'm one, and I cannot tell our superintendent what to do, but I don't agree with what's going on right now.
Thank you, Mr. Hironen. My suggestion for a work session was just one of the options. I mean, an information session or anything else would suffice. I just want the definition so I know whether we're doing it or we're not. Further discussion?
Just like to make my opinion on this one.
Mr. Stephen Otero.
I think that, I mean, as Eloy said, we're the biggest employer. Well, being the biggest employer, taking into consideration who's coming to work isn't a lot of people. Now, where I work, I've been asking for my guys to come back to work because there's a lot of work that has to be done before we start again. And I think that people should be disciplined enough to not get together with each other, to know where is a danger zone. I just, I don't know, I think that as big as our district is, I don't know, I'm guessing that we have maybe all the
1,200,
custodians. Can you give us a report, who's coming to work?
all 244-day employees.
Which is custodians, secretaries, principals.
Assistant principals, technology department, maintenance.
So on the average per site, how many do you think there is?
6, 7.
Mr. President, can I follow up a question? Can you ask, Ms. Sanders, can you tell me, of all those 244-day employees, how many of them fell in those parameters of the list the governor issued yesterday?
What parameters? I'm sorry.
She sent a list of essential workers.
The governor has, I'm sorry, Mr. President, members of the board, Mr. Hidon, the governor has actually given us a mandate to keep our buildings open. So we could make some adjustments. In my view, if someone's a 244-day employee, the reason they're a 244-day employee is because they're essential. Otherwise, their contract probably doesn't need to be 244 days.
That's not my question. My question was that on her list yesterday that she sent out that were essential employees for the state of New Mexico, all the way across from business to governments. How many of your 244 days fall in those parameters?
I'm sorry, Mr. President, members of the board, Mr. Hidon, she didn't address schools.
She left schools off there because for a reason.
Mr. President, Mr. Hidon,
Mr. Frank Otero.
yeah, the reason why she left off for a reason is because all 89 school districts are governed by school boards, okay? But when the real dollars come from the big school board, and the big school board is the legislature, and so, you know, we can dilly-dally about what we're going to do right now in this short term, but, you know, come at the end of June, that's when our budget ends, okay? And all we got is 10% left in our budget to take care of issues, you know, so you know, we have like two versions of school districts in our state. We've got the state giving us the money and telling us what to do with it, and then they turn around and tell you, when you call them, they turn around and tell you that, oh well, you need to deal with it at the local level. That's unfair for the local level, because, you know, they fund the state through a state equalization guarantee, and every other school district's competing for the same dollars, and so you know, we all need to understand about it. You know, we need to kind of push back right now that we got some urgency, and yeah, we need to find out who needs to be here at work and who doesn't. But you know, some people need to be at work. Where I work at the old hospital and training school, I told my wife the other day that, you know, if I was still working there and these were current days, it was a residential facility, that's where I would be most of the time, is fulfilling my duties. And yeah, I have a family, and yeah, I have a life, and yeah, I have all this kind of stuff. But you know, it's what they're telling us right now is a third of the people are sheltered, and not everybody's sheltered. I mean, so I don't know. I'm with you guys as far as finding out who the right people should be, but you know, some people need to be there, I guess, and we just need to find out who they are.
Mr. President, members of the board.
Ms. Sanders.
I've actually, through my updates, I've let you all know that I am going week by week with this. I've let my administrators know that as well. It is changing week by week, and I agree with you that needs to be re-looked at. I said this on Monday when I talked to my staff, but to get this together, we came right off of spring break and right into it, where other school districts had a week to prepare. We did not. One of the other things that we're probably providing for our kids that other districts don't have the capacity to do is all of our online learning. And there's a lot of personnel that is required for those things. We're feeding 2,000 kids a day, both lunch and 2,000 breakfasts every day. I can certainly relook at what you're asking me to, but it is disheartening that this situation is disappointing.
So I agree that there's great things that feeding these kids. I mean, I went over there to a couple of the schools, and it's amazing the volunteers that we have there and the look on the kids' face. I mean, I don't want to stop doing that. I don't want to stop servicing them at all. I mean, I thought that was one of the greatest things in the world. But the definitions and what we're supposed to be doing handed down from the state and PED to me is simply vague. And like Mr. Otero said, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, it's hard to come up with a list of things we should and should not be doing when nobody's been through this before. Nobody, including us. I don't care how old you are, you have not been through this. So it's just a changing thing. And maybe if we get some more clarity as to some of the definitions, then that will answer at least some of my questions.
And Mr.
That's,
President,
go ahead, Ms. Sanders.
I would like to ask for something because it seems like I don't think you're going to get the definitions that you want because the direction that we've gotten is it is a local decision. So because it's a local decision, I think that I need the board to give me that direction.
Mr. President, there's no way we can take action on this. It wasn't on the agenda. The governor came out yesterday. The United States Surgeon General came out yesterday morning. I don't know what other message we need. I mean, I believe everyone probably, let's hope that the plan is that it takes a long time for this thing to infect everybody, whoever's gonna get infected. I don't know how that's gonna work, but the spirit is not to make the spike now. I mean, just to carry it a long way. And I'm just disappointed to see what we have right now.
So maybe what we can do is probably, I mean, we would have to do this next week, I would think. And like I said, in some of the earlier comments in a different item, this is just the infancy of this thing. It's going to change over and over. Chances are it's going to get a lot worse. I mean, I don't see it getting better for a while. I see it getting worse for a while. So maybe we need to consider having a work session to talk through all this and get as many definitions as we can from whoever. I mean, I send them emails saying, I don't know what this means, and maybe they'll answer them, maybe they won't. But if you asked for an email, you'd probably get a different response than I did, which makes
Mr. President, I agree with you, and I agree with you. It's gonna, I am agreeing with the experts that this thing is gonna get worse before it gets better. But if we continue this direction that we have here, we're gonna get really bad. So we have a choice to make. I mean, it's common sense. I mean, we can't make any, it was not advertised in the agenda right now. This just happened yesterday with the governor, so there's no way that we would have been able to advertise this in time. But
Mr. I think that an opinion could be given. Doesn't have to be an action item.
So I've got a suggestion.
Mr. Stephen Otero.
You know, secretaries didn't become secretaries because they didn't care. You know, principals didn't become principals because they didn't care. You know, maintenance guys don't become maintenance guys because they don't care. These people, they love their job and they love what they're doing. I would suggest that you open it up to the staff that's working 244 days right now and ask them, if you guys want to be off and you feel you're unsafe, you're welcome to be off, but you might have to use your sick leave. Because I don't think people are sitting here doing nothing. I'm sure they're working, which is going to make it easier to transition back to being a successful school district as we are. So I would suggest, just a suggestion, here again, can't say what to do, but a suggestion that if there's staff members out there that are working currently right now as a 244 day and they have the sick leave or vacation, they can use it. Where I work, they gave that option to the staff members that if they wanted to take off, they could, because they didn't want the employees to feel like they're being forced. So this way, I think it would open up those staff members to use that time to take off. And I don't think it's going to be questioned in reference to sick leave or vacation or anything else. I know that policy is certain, or maybe it's just management policy, is that if you take 3 days off in a row, you have to bring a doctor excuse. Well, in this case, I'm sure that can be waived. But I'm suggesting that open it up to those that are working right now, and if they don't want to come to work, then they should be given that option.
Mr. President, members of the board, Mr. Stephen Otero, I have given that option to employees. Exactly that. If they don't feel safe, that they absolutely can go home and use the leave that they need to.
Thank you, Mr. So my initial beginning of this was to say, if we, for instance, we have a responsibility as board members to participate in a board meeting, and we're doing that, and we are not sitting in the boardroom. If there's a way for people to accomplish what it is they're supposed to be doing from a remote location is what I'm talking about. There will be some people that can't do that. I get this. There will be some people that there's no way they could do their job from home. And those people, if they don't want to come to work, they may be asked to take leave. I'm fine with that. But if there is a job, just like we're doing right now, that can be performed remotely, then that's something that I think that we should consider as well.
And I guess just to follow up on and I think, Frank, with your experience in the hospital and dealing with employees, I am sure that there are some employees that don't have the sick leave. But there's one way or another. I don't know if they have the time. I would suggest that they take the time and use their leave for this.
Mr. President, members of the board, can I touch on that comment, on your comment, Steve?
Mr. Hidalgo.
Ms. Sanders said she would like, I don't know the way she phrased it, recommendation or a nudging, I don't know how the way she said it, but I was hoping she would give us something like that and saying, these are the people that can work from home. These are the people that need to come in and do payroll. They're going to come in for 6 hours and they'll get their portion completed. They'll get out of here. They'll go home. I have another group here of HR that needs to take care of this. I don't know who's the essential ones and who needs just to keep everyday things going. But I would like to see them separated like the intent is made right now. Let's separate everybody. I can't see how everybody in Las Cruces School District is taking vacation. I can't see how everybody in the Socorro District is taking vacation. If there's people that can contribute and work from home, I expect that. I would hope that they're Americans, that they're people from our community, of Leche County, Los Lunas schools, to say, look, I'm gonna do my part. I am gonna contribute from home. Because this is us, we're all in this together. That's what I wanna hear. I'm not wanting to wait for us to give a nudge somewhere. We don't have time to wait. Like next week is gonna be worse, they said, or this week is gonna be worse. Time's ticking right now. I just don't get it.
So let me just interject here. So what I'm hearing is we could get together a work session probably next week. Early part of next week. So we can sit down and discuss this. We can discuss it longer if you want, but I think it's going to be better if we sat down and discussed, once we get some of these definitions and stuff, and determine what course of action, is prudent based on what it is we have to accomplish, who can do this, who can do that, who can be remote, who can be present, who can't do those kind of things. I think a work session early next week would be as soon as we could do this, to sit down and discuss this. Because I know that everybody's going to have an input and we can do this for a long time. That's just my suggestion, is that we get a work session set up for the early part of next week, and we sit down and we meet and we discuss this very thing. It's very important, I think, to me. So I think it's something.
I agree with you, Mr. President. I'm with you on this, but I would also like to not want to wait till next week to see something happening and members of our community is not losing faith in us, and we're appearing to be selfish with this thing. So I'm hoping to see changes by then. But I would agree with the workshop on this, work session on this.
So I will work with Ms. Sanders to get a very early next week work session to discuss this issue.
Remember, Mr. President.
Mr.
President, Mr. Hiroan.
Mr. Frank.
President.
Go ahead.
I don't want to leave here with using the word selfish. I don't think anybody's being selfish. We're being responsible. We're trying to do what we can to make sure people get a salary and get their paycheck. But, I don't know if the state authorizes us to let people off on administrative leave. That's another thing you'll have to look into. I know the superintendent can grant administrative leave just for a certain amount of days, but for the school board to grant administrative leave for a certain period of time, I mean, that's another can of worms. So, nobody's overlooking anybody. But you know, this is just
Mr. President,
It's getting worse day by day.
Hold on, Mr. Hidon.
Okay, go ahead. Mr. President, Mr. Otero, the governor said work from home. She said that 5 different times. That's when I say being selfish. If there's people that can be at home, work from home, contribute from home. That's what I'm directing this at.
Any more comments?
Mr. President?
Ms. Sanders?
I'm actually looking at the evening communication from the PED, and it does talk about how Governor Lujan Grisham gave a new public health emergency, and the next paragraph said this does not, in big capital letters, apply to public schools. School meal sites should follow the same guidelines, and goes on and on. So I think that there's a huge confusion between what people are hearing from the governor and what we're getting from the public education department, who is under the governor. So I am more than willing to work with and do what we need to do. It is not my intent for people to lose faith in us. It is not my intent that we want to look like fools. It's not my intent that we would create any issue within the community. So, I mean, I can do all of that on my own. I don't know what definitions that you really would like to have, other than I can give you all of the things, the communication that I've received from the Public Education Department. I mean, I can offer up all of those things.
Right, and it is I know it's difficult to get the answers because nobody wants to give you the answer. Nobody wants to tell you who is a essential employer, who isn't. My point in all of this is if it can be done remotely, then let's do it remotely. That's it. That's my main point here. But in order to accomplish that, we have to get some of these definitions.
Mr. Smith, I agree with you. I think we're going to be frustrated by trying to get the definitions because I don't think they're going to give them to us. At least that's what superintendents have been on conference calls like 3 times a week. And we're all very frustrated that we cannot get the definitions, and we are all doing something different. But what I'm saying in Los Lunas, I hear you loud and clear. We will make adjustments. I will make this pledge to you in a public meeting that I will make changes to what we're doing by the end of this week. If we feel like we need to continue to have a work session, that's fine, but I am pledging that I will make some adjustments to what we are doing and look at what employees can work from home. The vast majority of our employees are working from home. But we do have some that are not. We sometimes with the help for giving out meals and that sort of thing. I know my tech people are going to have to be working because we need to get devices out to kids. We need to continue to set up their online learning. And so those are some things that I have to take into consideration, but I absolutely hear you.
Okay.
Mr. President, I got one more question though, just for verification.
Mr.
So
Stevens?
this is of Ms. Sanders.
Go ahead.
Okay. Do you have complaints from your principals or any concerns from your principals that their staff is not happy working? Have you had that? Have you had anybody contact you?
Mr. President, members of the board, I've had one principal contact me.
Any more comments?
Nope.
President, members of the board, Aaron is yelling from the other room. Do we want a work session?
I don't think that it would hurt to get a work let me start that over. Wouldn't hurt to get a work session scheduled, even one of the afternoons this week, I meant, just to sit down and talk and maybe go over some of the answers, and hopefully PED will return some of our emails and phone calls and everything else. But again, my concern isn't really who fits under what category. It's what we can do to minimize our footprint, I guess. But yes, I would like a work session scheduled this week, if possible, one of these afternoons.
Mr. Otero, members of the board, Ms. Sanders, have some concerns with the way that we have been announcing these meetings. As you know, I really do need to follow the OMA in doing this.
Who's talking?
It's Karen. So the earliest, we're going through the news bulletin, and one of the directives that we got that they are trying very diligently to have us continue to follow the Open Meetings Act and how we're announcing things. Earliest I can do that, following that and getting it to the news bulletin would be Monday or Tuesday of next week. If you are telling us that we have to do it sooner, I still have to have 72 hours. And my concern with doing it sooner than that is that we have to have a reasonable time for someone to be able to pick up an agenda. And that says 72 hours. So unless it's an emergency, I need 72 hours. So that's my piece.
Any other comment?
Yes, I do.
Sanders?
Members of the board, I actually have a call with the PED secretary on Thursday. Perhaps that will shed a little more light on, this is actually the first secretary's call that we've had since they announced it the week that we were out on spring break. So this would probably give us more direction. And I would share that with you in my update for this week. I don't know how that affects what you would like to do with the work session.
So, one more comment.
Mr. Stephen Otero.
Well, can we wait to see what changes Ms. Sanders will propose before we set up a work session? Maybe it'll be satisfactory to everyone in an email.
Oh, I'm absolutely. This is a living document that we're working on right here. So yeah, if there's any news in an hour from now or tomorrow or whatever, like I said, this is changing so fast that we're all trying to keep up. And
So, Mr. President, this is Eloy here. So if
Mr. Hidon.
we're being asked to wait 72 hours, let's hope the coronavirus waits 72 hours. But if if Ms. Sanders, when's the soonest you will have, you pledged to us that you'd have something to us? When will you have something to us?
Before I leave tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Dana, Ms. Sanders. I appreciate that. And so do the members of the community.
Any other comments?
And Mr. President, I'm sorry, members of the board, Mr. Hidon, if I may, rather than get something to you, I will copy you on something I send to my staff, to my administrators.
So you've already sent something?
No, I will before I leave.
Okay.
Any further comment? So that brings us to, it's so dark in here. Item number 16, adjournment. I gotta announce the meetings first, sorry. Item number 15, announcement of meetings. As allowed by the Open Meeting Act and District Open Meetings Resolution, on occasion, a quorum of board members attend the same function, including those held at school sites at the district level, as well as sports functions, conferences, workshops, and trainings. Board members will refrain from discussing and/or acting on board issues in those settings. In addition, only official meetings are published, and if other meetings are scheduled, they will be announced in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. I'd like to announce the following meetings. On March 26th, there's a board work session in the boardroom. This one's at 5 o'clock. I think this one's probably going to be via Zoom as well. There will be a quorum in attendance. Is that correct?
Yes.
Via Zoom? Okay. On April 14th, there's a finance committee meeting in the boardroom at 4 p.m. And on April 21st, there's a regular board meeting in the boardroom at 6 PM, more than likely similar to what we did tonight. Before I read item number 16, I want to thank everybody for participating via Zoom, and those of you that watched the streaming. I apologize if it was a little bit glitchy. This is our first time, but we had no major failures and we got to complete the meeting. So thank you, everybody, all the tech department and Ms. Sanders and her staff, everybody that put this meeting together. It's greatly appreciated. Item number 16, adjournment. I'll stand for a motion.
I move we adjourn.
I have a motion by Mr. Hidon to adjourn. I'll stand for a second.
Second.
I have a second by Mr. Vickers. As we are Zoom, I'll call roll. Mr. Franco Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Vickers, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Hidon, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The meeting is adjourned at 7:35 PM. Thank you.